March 1985. Konstantin Chernenko was dead. At his funeral, world leaders paid their respects to Mikhail Gorbachev and weighed up the new, younger man in charge of the Soviet Union.
George Bush was there. As vice president, he was head of our delegation. When we walked out of that meeting, I said to George, I said, this is a very different Soviet leader than any we've seen before.
Russians, too, noticed the difference.
Gorbachev was greeted with great enthusiasm. Everyone cheered in our institute. We were all pleased that such an energetic and educated person had become the new Secretary General of our Communist Party.
We expected a miracle. We thought he was the Messiah who had come to introduce change.
The state of the Soviet Union and its society could be described very simply with a phrase used by people across the country. We can't go on living like this any longer. That applied to everything. The economy was stagnating, there were shortages, and the quality of goods was very poor.
Gorbachev took over a superpower sick with social breakdown, corruption in the Communist Party, and alcoholism. To tackle these ills and to revive a decrepit economy, Gorbachev called for reconstruction, or perestroika, and a new spirit of honesty, glasnost.
I remember very clearly what Gorbachev said at that time. He said, there are two roads we can take. We can either tighten our belts very, very tightly and reduce consumption, which the people will no longer tolerate. Or we can try to diffuse international tension and overcome the disagreement between East and West, and so free up the gigantic sums that are spent on armaments in the Soviet Union.
In Washington, Reagan had to overcome objections from inside his own administration before he could meet the new man in the Kremlin.
I truly believe that Ronald Reagan would have had the foreign policy battle of his life, if not the broadly political battle of his life, starting within his own party and across this country, if he had tried to reach out to Gorbachev without a seconder for his point of view.
But you want to, but you need to get away.
It took Margaret Thatcher to talk first with the Gorbachev and then to publicly say, this is a man we can deal with.
Geneva, Switzerland, November 1985. The stage was set for the first superpower summit in 6 years. Reagan, too, was keen to find out whether he could do business with Gorbachev.
I felt always that President Reagan was exactly the kind of man that Russians, under normal circumstances, would have really liked, the kind of American that they would really like. First of all, he was kind of an icon, you know, he's a cowboy, and they loved that. And the other was that he was very patriotic. You really had the sense that he was going to break into God Bless America every time you saw him, and it wasn't corny. He really believed it. And Soviet Union, even some of the most hardened, cynical Soviets, really respected patriotism.
Many people in the West wondered whether the 74-year-old Ronald Reagan was up to taking on the 54-year-old Mikhail Gorbachev.
The president's aide came in and said, Mr. President, you know, do you want to put your coat on? And he said, no, I'm not sure. And somebody said, well, it's very cold outside. You should really wear a coat. It was announced that the Soviet cavalcade was at the gates. And Reagan turned and, without putting on his overcoat, walked to the door. And there was much speculation as to whether this tired old man, President of the United States, could keep up with this wily, energetic, young, vigorous communist. And to the amazement of the world, the old man goes down the steps, lickety-split, meets and greets the Soviet leader, who comes out all bundled up in an overcoat, hat, muffler, looking as though he were in Iceland rather than Geneva.
The summit agenda, human rights, Afghanistan, and arms control, was daunting, but the body language was encouraging. The two leaders immediately held a private meeting.
It was scheduled for 10 minutes. 20 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by, 40 minutes went by, and the White House guy who keeps the schedule going came around to me, and he said, I should go in and let them know they're going overtime. And I said, if you do that, you should be fired. The name of the game, it shows they're getting along.
But were they really getting along?
I returned at the break to meet my colleagues. They asked, what's your impression? I said, I have met a caveman, a dinosaur.
The two leaders were divided above all by Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars.
Are you getting along?
See that, can't you?
It was a shouting match, not angry as much as two people, as I said, passionate in their views, with diametrically opposed positions. And this was the occasion in which the president said, but you must believe that this is so important for the safety of the world that I will give you the technology as we develop it. And Gorbachev laughed and said, Mr. President, surely you understand I can't believe that since you won't even give us the technology for milking machines.
Mikhail Gorbachev left Geneva without agreement on his main objective, curbing the arms race. But the United States and the Soviet Union were talking again. One year into the Gorbachev era, and the Cold War continued. The Geneva call for a second summit was repeatedly postponed. Fears of nuclear war remained, and even increased.
During that period, we had a lot of ideological training. We were constantly told about Reagan's speeches, so we called the US imperialists the evil empire. We started going out to sea twice as often. We kept a huge number of submarines in the sea all the time, as close as possible to the US and British coasts. And the more submarines we sent out to sea, the more you sent out. This dangerous concentration and proximity of nuclear submarines could lead to unpredictable consequences.
A nuclear disaster did occur, but not between the two superpowers. In April 1986, an explosion ripped apart number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, north of Kiev. The disaster highlighted the incompetence of the Soviet system as volunteers started the lethal task of cleaning up the huge radioactive leak.
The firemen who got burnt while helping to extinguish the blaze were brought to a hospital near where I lived. At the time, people knew nothing about radiation, and there was a lot of confusion about how it was transmitted. The firemen died very soon after, and when they were buried, people were scared that the radiation would spread from their graves.
Chernobyl, its surroundings, and large areas of Ukraine and Belarusia were heavily contaminated and emptied of their population.
Gorbachev knew even before that catastrophe about the danger of nuclear weapons. That explosion showed that even without war and without nuclear missiles, nuclear power could destroy humankind.
Reykjavik, Iceland, the second Reagan-Gorbachev summit. Gorbachev now decided to re-examine Reagan's first ever arms control proposal, known as the zero option. Reagan had offered not to deploy cruise and Pershing missiles in Europe if the Soviets withdrew their SS-20 rockets. Brezhnev had turned Reagan down flat. The new American missiles had been stationed in Europe. Now Gorbachev wanted to cut a deal.